just messed up this fight.
I think it's disgusting. I think it's disgusting. I think he's disgusting, and I never want to see him reffing ever again.
The guy has no idea what he's looking at. I said it a long time ago. The guy shouldn't even be watching MMA on television.
He makes me sick. That guy has no business reffing fights, and I promise you, you're not going to see him again.
Refs play a crucial role in any UFC fight, but let's be real, they're human too, and one bad call from the third man in the octagon can completely change the fight's outcome. That said, these are the times referees totally ruined UFC fights.
Disappointed!
First up, we gotta talk about Matt Wyman versus Mac Danzig at UFC 115, having won only one of his last 4 fights when he squared up against Matt Wyman in UFC 115. The action got intense when Danzig found himself trapped at a guillotine choke midway through the opening round. Danzig was putting up a solid defense, but Wyman misread the situation. He thought Danzig was out cold and told the ref Yves Levine to check on him. Levine, trusting Wyman's judgment, checked Danzig's arm, thinking it had gone limp. As a result, he waved off the fight.
It is all over! No, that was wrong. He was not out. He was not out. That was a tremendous mistake. He's wrong.
But here's the kicker. Danzig was far from tapping out. He never intended to quit, but he wouldn't move his arm because he was too busy trying to defend the choke by posting on Wyman's knee. Unfortunately, there was no going back on the ref's decision. However, Wyman stepped up and offered Danzig a rematch. In the rematch, Wyman claimed victory with a unanimous decision, showing that sometimes second chances do pay off. Now, it's one thing, carry on. And this time, it was when Dos Santos locked horns with Saint Denis at UFC 267.
To be removed in the middle of a card.
Yeah, we've removed guys in the middle of cards too. But this was pretty bad.
Next up, we've got Ryan Jensen going head-to-head with Steve Steines at the UFC Night 19. Now, Steines was making his big UFC debut back in 2009, but boy did he get a raw deal, all thanks to referee Gary Ritter. As the clock ticked down in the opening round, Steines found himself in a tricky situation with Jensen hunting for a guillotine choke on the mat. Ritter steps in to check on Steines, who actually gives a thumbs up signal to say he's good to go. But here's the kicker. Ritter somehow missed it and thought Steines had gone limp, so he called off the fight.
It's all over!
Locked it up.
And Ryan Jensen wins for the first time!
Talk about a rough debut. But guess what, fam? Bad debut calls aren't reserved for Steines alone. And next on the line is Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar didn't get a warm welcome for his debut at UFC 81 in 2008 because he faced off against former heavyweight champ Frank Mir. Lesnar wasted no time taking Mir down and started dropping thunderous ground and pound blows. It was looking like a quick win. But then, in comes referee Steve Mazzagatti claiming Lesnar was throwing illegal shots to the back of the head. He deducted a point, gave Mir time to collect himself, and even reset the fighters on their feet. Lesnar, not appearing to be intentionally targeting the back of Mir's head, dropped him again and went back to the ground and pound. But here's a twist. Mir slaps on a knee bar submission that forces Lesnar to tap out just 60 seconds into the fight. And Dana White wasn't too thrilled because he went on to the Opie and Anthony show later on and straight up said, "I think he's the worst ref in the history of any fight business, ever." Now that's a big statement. With that being said, you don't need people to tell you who made a bad call when you've got a fighter raining blows down on you. It's a pretty clear sign that something's gone seriously wrong. UFC 45, Phil Baroni versus Evan Tanner. Now, Baroni had his moments in the fight, but then Tanner started to lay it on thick. He hurt Baroni, mounted him, and rained punches and elbows like there was no tomorrow. Now, here's where it gets wild. Ref Larry Landless decides to check on Baroni and asks if he's okay. Baroni, even though he replies that he's good to go, the ref somehow gets it all twisted and waves off the fight. Baroni, obviously not pleased with this call, goes all Hulk mode and starts shouting and trying to throw punches at the ref for not letting him continue.
Look, Phil Baroni's not going to tap out from getting punched. He'll go out before he taps out. I think this is just an unfortunate miscommunication.
You can't help but cringe at that one. Moving on to UFC Tough 10 finale in 2009, where John Jones faced off against Matt Hamill. Jones, a young gun at the time, pulled off a slam that practically rattled the arena. He slammed Hamill so hard that the hammer dislocated his shoulder. It was brutal and things were about to get even crazier. Jones kept going, landing a sustained ground and pound assault, including some vicious elbows. Jones couldn't believe the fight wasn't being called off, but he kept working. Out of nowhere, ref Steve Mazzagatti decides it's time to stop the show, claiming that Jones had thrown illegal 12-16 elbows. He deducted a point from Jones, and things go haywire. Mazzagatti asks Hamill if he can continue, and Hamill, unable to do so due to his injured shoulder, says no. It later comes out that the shoulder was the issue, not the elbow strikes. That call handed Jones his only loss in a 28-fight career, a decision that still has UFC President Dana White campaigning to get it overturned even after a decade later. Now, judges, commentators, and referees need to be on their A-game, because positions can get pretty wild, and it can be tricky to figure out what's happening. It all comes down to the referee's awareness, and sometimes they make some eyebrow-raising calls. Let's take a trip back to UFC Fight Night 62 in 2015, where referee Eduardo Hurdy had a moment he'd probably want to forget. In a fight between Drew Dober and Leonardo Silva, things got dicey in the second round. Silva dropped to the mat, working on a guillotine choke, but Dober wasn't having it. He defended against the choke, and Silva's grip started to slip, putting Dober in a sweet position on top. But then, out of the blue, Hurdy decided to end the fight, thinking that Dober was out cold, even though it was pretty clear he wasn't. Dober must have been in shock, but he didn't take it lying down. He planned to appeal the decision, and you won't believe what happened next. The referee, Eduardo Hurdy, had to swallow some humble pie and admitted he goofed. The Brazilian commission overseeing the event stepped in, and they fixed the result to a no contest. No doubt, some of these calls can be mind-boggling, and Scott Smith's UFC debut against David Terrell at UFC 59 is a perfect example. Referee Marco Lopez had a moment to forget in 2006 because midway through the first round, he decided to step in and told the fighters to separate after they'd been working in the clinch. Now, here's where things get absolutely crazy. Scott Smith heard the ref's call and did what he was told, breaking away from the clinch, but Terrell apparently didn't get the memo and kept on fighting. He took Smith down and locked in a rear naked choke, and Smith ended up tapping out. What's wild is that Lopez didn't even try to intervene and declare Terrell the winner. Smith wasn't having it though. He tried to appeal the decision, and he had the UFC's video and audio backing him up, showing that Terrell had called for a break. But crazy as it sounds, the ruling stood, giving Hands of Steel Smith his only loss in what was a 12-fight career at the time. But ref bad calls get even crazier, and this time Shane Nelson versus Aaron Riley at UFC 96 in 2009 was another level of intensity. Just 44 seconds into the bout, Shane Nelson landed a massive right hand on Aaron Riley, which should have sealed the deal. But here's where things get absolutely wild. Riley, in a desperate attempt to stay in the game, immediately tried to get into full guard, showing that he was ready to continue the fight. It was crystal clear that he was good to go. However, referee Rick Fike for some reason saw things differently. He waved off the fight, calling it a TKO, even though Riley was on his feet in utter disbelief at the decision. This stoppage instantly etched itself into the history books as one of the most infamous officiating blunders in the UFC. It was so bizarre that it led to an immediate rematch just a few months later. In this do-over, Nelson didn't have the same luck, and he lost by unanimous decision. And there you have it, some of the times bad referee calls ruined UFC fights. Which of these calls do you think takes the cake as the craziest? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more mind-blowing UFC content.